Imagine, if you will, that you've bought some property. Little piece of land, there's a house on it, there's a garden, there's a shed, garage, shop, whatever whatever works for you on it. And it's your property. You bought it. But on this property, there's a hole, fairly substantial, just hole in the ground. And you think, I need to fill that hole up. So what you do is you go to your garage thing, you get your shovel, and you go a couple feet away from the hole, and you start digging, and you start filling up the hole. And after a while, you've filled it all up, and it's a full hole. Oh, there's another hole. So you're standing there, and your new neighbor, he's not new, you're new because you just bought the place, looks over the fence and says, hey, what you doing there? Now I'm filling up this hole, and now I have another hole. He goes, oh, well, here's your problem. You're using a shovel. You need to go rent a backhoe from, Lowe's or Home Depot or someplace, and use that to fill up your hole. So you go and you do that, and you get the thing, and you're like, oh, I feel the power. Those teeth dig into the earth. Yes, this is fun. You're a little new at it because you don't know how to work the thing. And eventually, you get so good that you can actually use the bucket thing to tamp down all the dirt, and it's flat, and I have done it. I am man with machine. Another hole. And a friend of yours comes over and says, what are you doing? I'm trying to fill up this hole. And I go back and I filled up the hole, and now I have another hole. He goes, oh, you don't know what you're doing. You need to get a contractor. You need to get somebody else to do this for you because no offense, but you're kind of dumb. I know a guy. Here's his number. Tell him I told you to call him, and he'll come with his crew and his equipment, and he'll do it. So you do it. You call the contractor, and he brings out his big trailer with machine and more stuff on it, and a crew of guys, and they come and they fill up that hole, but now there's an even bigger hole. Finally, another friend of yours happens by who is kind of a spiritual, hooey-gooey, hippie type person, kind of very person of the earth, and he says, man, what are you doing, man? That's my hippie. That's all I got. It's the best I can do. I'm trying this hole, and now I have these holes in this bigger one. What am I supposed to do? I've done everything else. You tell me what to do. Man, you can't put anything between you and the earth. You're using a shovel, and you're using machines. No, man, you're one with the dirt, so you got to use your hands, man. By this time, you're desperate, so you go to the hole. You go, again, a few feet away, and you're like, okay, it's first thing in the morning, and maybe you've sat on the ground and saying, please help me, whatever dirt being is there to fill the hole. And you dig your hands in and tearing up the grass layer, and you're doing it, and you're slowly, and by the end of the day, you're hot and you're sweaty and dirty, but you've filled the hole with your bare hands, and there's still a hole in the ground. Wouldn't that be stupid? Would that be like, duh? You make it worse every time. Does your relationship with God ever feel like that? Do you ever feel like you're in a constant state of adding this in or taking this out, but you don't ever feel any closer, any more complete, any more free, any more at peace with God? Or have you just given up entirely on the whole, and you've just retreated into your house, into your comfort zone, and you're in your own little place now where it's warm and happy, and you don't have to deal with that bad, nasty hole? It's still there. It's still your property, but you're just shut off from it. Have you done either of those? Or maybe you've been there. Maybe you're on the way there. I don't know. If so, you are letting yourself be led away from and cheated out of continually experiencing the sense of completeness and freedom and peace that comes from living in Jesus alone. You are letting yourself be led away. You are being robbed of those things that are yours in him. I'd like you to open up to Colossians 2, verse 8, which is where we begin today. And we're going to look at, three essential truths that Paul gave the Colossians and gives us to keep that from happening, to keep us from trying to dig our hole full. In case you're newer with us, maybe you haven't been in a few weeks, we're engaged in a study of the book of Colossians, which we're calling systemic Christianity. Systemic meaning it affects every other system of your life, the way you speak, the way you think, the way you talk to spouses and kids and coworkers, and it permeates your entire being. And we started off the book by looking at Paul's saying to the Colossians, you guys had a great start. You were grounded in the truth, but you need reminders of some of these things. And then he talked about how we need to be dedicated, to the task, how Paul and others were in jail, but in jail joyfully because of the fruit that the gospel was bearing. And that should motivate us to follow after God just as they did. And we saw how, in my opinion, the sort of purpose statement in the letter are in verses 6 and 7 of chapter 2, when Paul says, as you therefore have received Christ Jesus as Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith as you have been taught, abounding in it with thanksgiving. It says you're in him, keep going in him. Don't go to anything else. And now we get to verse 8, and we're going to read this, just kind of all read along with me. We'll read to the end of the chapter. Paul says this, beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and you are complete in him, who is the head of all principality and power. In him you were also circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, buried with him in baptism, in which you also were raised with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. And you, being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he has made alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us. And he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. Having disarmed principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. So let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ. Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom all the body, nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows with the increase that is from God. Therefore, if you died with Christ from the basic principles of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which all concern things which perish with the using, according to the commandments and doctrines of men. These things indeed have an appearance of wisdom and self-imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body, but are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. Paul ain't playing. This is probably one of his most direct assaults on legalism and things like that to any of the churches. So let's take a look again at how we can avoid being led astray and cheated out of continually experiencing systemic completeness, freedom, and peace that comes from living in Jesus alone. And the first thing I want to point out is this: in Jesus alone, we are systemically complete. Now, you have to remember, or I'll remind you, actually, that this is written in the first century, and in the first and second century, Gnosticism was very big, a very Greek-oriented way of thinking, and they were very much into dualism. This means that they thought the flesh was bad. Anything physical, anything material, anything that has matter is bad, and anything spiritual is good. Flesh bad, spirit good. Things of, our bodies are bad, and anything of the spirit is good. So you can see how that could easily tie in to the thinking of Christianity, because we think the flesh is bad and that the spirit is good. So a lot of the language is the same, and it easily sort of wove its way into the Colossian church, along with Jewish legalism, because along with thinking flesh is bad, spirit is good, well, how do you deal with the flesh? Well, you have these rules, you have these legalism, and you participate in these things. So it all just sort of globbed together. And Paul is trying to sort this mess out. So he tells them in verse 8 to beware, which means look out, right? Beware, rocks falling. It means to look. That's essentially what the word means. It means look out, lest anyone cheat you. Now, this word for cheat, the word is here. The word is later on in English. It's cheat in verse 18. They're different Greek words, and this is the fun thing about Greek and English is in English you can have one word mean 10 things. Well, I'll have 10 words in Greek to express those 10 things. Here, in your translation, it might say lead captive. That's really the idea, to cheat in the sense of they would use it in terms of leading prey away from its safe place in order to, kill it, to rob something, and therefore be cheated. Or in other words, I'll have to do this. Maybe you've done this with your pet. I've done this with Wilson a few times. I want him to come from where he is to where I want him to be, so I'll pretend I have a treat in my hand. Come here. And he's like, oh, little chihuahua ears go, boing, radar's up, treat. And he'll slowly I want to be here, but I want the food. And that instinct takes over, and he comes over to me, and I'm like, sorry, it's empty. And he's like, okay. What did I do? I cheated him, right? That's what this word means. It means to be lured away, to be cheated in that sense. And he says, don't let anyone, beware lest anyone cheat you. Well, how? Through philosophy and empty deceit. Now, we use the term philosophy to be very broad. They had a much more narrow view of using this word. The word means lover of wisdom. And it was just very contrary to Jesus. Anything that had to do with this kind of thinking was not compatible with Jesus. So he says, don't let people cheat you, lead you away with that philosophy, that kind of love of wisdom, rather than the one who gives us wisdom, right? And empty deceit. This is a fun word. Empty deceit. The best way I can describe this word is this. You remember when you were a kid, maybe you did this, maybe you didn't. You would have Easter baskets, right? And that maybe the first time you saw in the box the big chocolate bunny. Chocolate bunny, it's here, chocolate bunny! And you get it open, and you're like, well, this is going to be so good. And you take a bite, and it is hollow. I have been robbed. Where's the bunny? That's empty deceit. It's something that looks substantial, but it's hollow on the inside. So don't be led astray by hollow chocolate bunnies. Bad news. And that's the teachings, that's what this philosophy was. It looked like it had substance, but it was empty. It was hollow inside. So don't beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy, empty deceit, according to the tradition of men. Tradition, nothing is inherently wrong with tradition, but it's the tradition of men. It's the thing that's passed down from one to another that can bind you. Nor, it goes on to say, according to the basic principles of the world. This is... Paul's using language. We have the same thing. Different religious groups will take words that we use in one sense, and they will use them to mean something else. And that's what Paul is doing, which is why it can be confusing when you read this. It's like, what's he talking about? I understand the words, but I don't get the application. It's because he's using Gnostic language, words that they use, that the Christians also use, but they mean different things. So when he's talking about basic principles, in this context, as weird as it sounds, it means the order, the structure of the spiritual beings that we can't see. In other words, you think of angels, and sometimes Paul talks about them in terms of principalities and powers and these different levels of angels that you think about. Michael is called the archangel, the first angel. So there seems to be some kind of almost military structure to them. And when he says basic principles, he's referring to that. At its core, the word just means basic units. Like if you have a fully constructed Lego, well, the individual blocks would be the basic principles, the individual units from which the thing is constructed. So Paul says, don't be led away according to the traditions of men, according to the basic principles of the world. So these build on one another, and not according to Christ. So when you read that, it's actually, he's saying in a way, beware lest anyone cheat you through these things instead of according to Christ. We are supposed to be led away to Christ. That's kind of cool. Be led of Paul, we're supposed to be drawn and pulled, and as we learn and as we teach, we are drawn away from our own selfness to Jesus. So we are supposed to be drawn away to those things. That's kind of cool. Verse 9, he says, for in him, and that's emphatic. That's in the sentence structure, that's like the primary thing. In him, and everything else follows from that. In him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. In him dwells. Now, this word means, it's talking about a permanent structure. Like the structure we're in now, this is a permanent thing, as opposed to, we could do this same thing in a tent, but that's a collapsible, portable, not temporary structure. Paul's language is very concrete, you could say. In him dwells, as in a permanent structure, all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. This word fullness is, again, a Gnostic co-opted word, which refers to the angelic levels between high, good God and low, evil flesh. So he's saying he's using their own language against them, using it correctly, you could say. He says, in him dwells all the fullness, all that stuff that you guys are into. It's all in Christ. In him dwells the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And they would have been like, no, not bodily, because flesh is bad, matter is evil, and God would not exist in such a thing. And Paul's saying, he does. The fullness of the Godhead bodily. This is the truth that is contrary to the stuff, to the empty deceit, the philosophy. This is Paul saying, you guys, it is true. It is in him. Verse 10, and you are complete in him. You hear the in him again? There's lots of in hims and with hims in this passage. I love it. And you are complete in him. Not you will be, not you were. You are presently, actively complete in him. That's the key. Not in anything else, not through anything else, not from anything else. We are complete in him now, today, who is the head of all principality and power. The head meaning, we talk about this, is the head of the company. That means the top, the chief, the lead person. Jesus is the head of the church. Literally, figuratively, however you want to look to see that. That's what it is. He is the head. You are complete in him, who is the head of all of the stuff you guys are trying to mess with. You guys are worshiping angels, which they did, and prayed to angels and so forth. It's like, it's all in him. Don't separate that from him, because it is all in him. You are complete in him. Verse 11, again, Paul's making a point. In him, you were also circumcised with the circumcision made without hands. And as you may know, circumcision was a rite of passage, an outward sign of an inward reality that God gave to Abraham, and consequently he put it in the law so that every Jewish male on the 8th day would be circumcised as a symbolic purification, as a removal of impurity. In him, you are also circumcised with a circumcision made without hands. Paul also talks about this elsewhere as being a circumcision of the heart. By putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ. And I like this word putting off because it means just that. Putting off. It's like when you take off your clothes, you're putting off your clothes. That's what this is. It's a disrobing. It's a stripping. It's the act of taking stuff off. So we are circumcised with him by the putting off, the removal of what? The body of the sins of the flesh. And he's using, again, the Gnostic language against them. The body, the organization, the whole, the flesh, whether it be literal or physical, that's how this word can be used. But we think of it in terms of, New Testament Christianity. The flesh is that part of us that is contrary to God, right? Paul talks about this. I think I might even have a slide for it if you want to put that up on the screen for this verse. Paul says in Colossians 5:16-18, I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary. These are opposed to one another, so that you do not do the things you wish. Anybody experienced that before? Hello, daily. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. So Paul says we've through this spiritual circumcision, this flesh has, in essence, has been put off, has been removed, has been stripped off, has been cut off from us. So the Gnostics were concerned with the physical. Again, they were against matter was bad, the body is bad. And Paul says, that's not the body you need to be worried about. It's this body of the sins of the flesh. That's the body you need to be worried about. It's that nature that needs to be dealt with. That's what he's talking about. Verse 12, he says, buried with him in baptism. I love that, with him. We were buried with him in baptism. It's like, it's as though when Jesus was taken down off the cross and taken to the tomb and put in that tomb and the rock was rolled over, it's as though we were in there with him. That's the reality. We were buried with him in baptism. And as you may know, baptism is this thing we do as believers because Jesus commanded us to baptize disciples in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's an outward act. It's a symbolic ritual that identifies us with Jesus. That's what Paul says. Remember, one of the things that this region was famous for was the dyeing of wool. They were the largest producer of black wool, but they were also the largest producer of dyed red and purple wool. Well, how do you dye wool? Well, you have a color mixture, water-based presumably, which theirs was, and the dye is mixed in, and you take the wool and you put it into the water, right? You are baptizing that. That's the word. That word comes from this act, from this industry of baptizing, of coloring, of dyeing fabric, dyeing material. It's put in, the material, whatever you're dyeing, the wool absorbs the color and it comes out a different color, right? Oh, it's been changed. But that act of going in, Paul says, we have been baptized into death with Jesus. I'm wording it wrong, buried with him in baptism. When you go into the water in that ritual of baptism, it's a picture of you being buried, put in that tomb, the rock rolled over. Done. And you come out different, buried with him in baptism. And then he goes on to say, if I can find my spot again, in which, buried with him in baptism, in which you also were raised with him. There it is again, with him. Isn't that cool? When that glorious morning, when the rock is rolled away and they go and they find that it's empty, you were raised with him through faith in the working of God who raised him from the dead. So we're buried with him in baptism. We're raised with him through faith in what God has done. Great, cool picture. I can't paint a bigger picture. Our faith is in God's working, specifically faith in God's work of raising Jesus from the dead. I mean, that's another verse you can put up there is Romans 10, 9, and 10. The resurrection is key to Christianity. Paul says, if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you were raised with him through faith. You will be saved. For with the heart one believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. We were raised with him through the faith we put in what God has done. See, the Gnostic Christians, the ones who had intermingled the truth with their own philosophy, allowed their philosophy to filter their understanding of what it meant to be in Christ. See, they were given the plain truth of it, but they let their philosophy goggles filter what it is they saw and understood and how they acted on it. It implied, their view, an incompleteness because we're still in the flesh. They said because we're still in this body, because we're still in this matter, and matter is inherently evil, we cannot be complete. And Paul says that's BS. That's baloney. We are still in the flesh, and it means we have to reach completeness when we die. And Paul tells them not to be led captive, not to be cheated by this, because it's baloney. It's not the physical body of our flesh that is a problem. It's the spiritual body of our flesh nature. This is why he says in 2 Corinthians 5:17, if anyone's in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new, brand new. That's the difference. Jesus himself says, deny yourself, pick up your cross daily, and follow me. Put that sin nature to death. Do you feel incomplete, spiritually or otherwise? I have. Sometimes it's not so much. Sometimes it's a whole lot. Corby, you're a pastor. You're supposed to be perfect and complete all the time. No. Ask my wife and kids. No, don't. Because they'll tell you. Do you feel incomplete spiritually or otherwise? Do you feel like you want, to die? It's like, I wish I was just done. Or you were dead. Or you want to do over. Well, guess what? It is done. You have been given a do-over. You have died. The problem is when we come back to feeling like this, it's because we're latched on to that old flesh self again. We don't need anything else to make us really be or to feel complete. You don't need anything else to make you feel complete. Makeup, clothing, a house, muscles, the right car, the right job, fame, fortune, acknowledgement, and recognition from other people, other forms of spirituality added into this thing. You don't need to add in that other stuff because it's done in Him. It's complete in Him. If you are feeling incomplete, and I say this from personal experience, if you are feeling incomplete, it's because you are trying to be filled up with something other than Jesus. Again, other things aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves, but when you use them to do what only Jesus can do in you, that's a problem. Don't let anyone, especially yourself, okay? Don't let anyone, especially yourself, rob you of the completeness that we can have in Him alone. Stop trying to dig that hole full. Again, in Jesus alone, we are systemically complete. That's the first of the essential truths that Paul's communicating here. The next one is, with Jesus alone, we are systemically free. Verse 13, and you, being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, He has made alive together with Him, having forgiven you all trespasses. Being dead, that's our status apart from Christ. Dead. But I'm breathing and I'm living and I'm walking. Well, yeah, but again, you are spiritually dead apart from Him. And you being dead in your trespasses, these trespasses, it means it's different than a deliberate, act, a deliberate sin. It means, where did it go? Lost my place. It means a lapse, an error, a mistake, a wrongdoing, but it still carries a sense of responsibility. So if you wander onto somebody else's property, maybe that property wasn't marked, you are trespassing. Now, you didn't go there on purpose, but you still did it, and you are still responsible for that. And Paul says, you being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh. So he's sort of lumping together, both the Jewish view, which was anybody who's not circumcised is lost, and you have to become circumcised to become a Christian. He says, no, that's not it either. Whether you've accidentally lost it or however you legalistic people are viewing this, you were dead in those things. One more thing about the trespasses. I don't know if you've noticed this, but even if let's say you did trespass on somebody's property and they were to, make charges against you and take you to the judge. If you said, well, I didn't mean to, I had right intentions, what would the judge do? Sorry, you crossed the line, you went on their property. Doesn't matter what your intentions are. You get pulled over by a cop for speeding. What? I didn't mean to be speeding. Well, yeah, but you were. Your intention is irrelevant. You are still responsible for the thing that you have done. Our trespasses, we're dead in them. And again, he brings in that circumcision. You being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, He has made alive So you were dead, but he has made alive. Who made the alive? Did we do that? No, he has made alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses. Forgiven, having forgiven, done. It's a done deal. It's already completely forgiven. There's freedom in that. So Paul's going to go on a little ADD word picture thing here. That's the first one. You've been forgiven. It's done. His next picture of this, verse 14, having wiped out the handwriting of requirement that was against us. This handwriting of requirement, a handwriting just simply means like a handwritten bill. You know, when you broke the law, you were essentially given a bill saying what your debt to society was. This is a handwriting, that's what it was. Of requirements just simply means specifying the thing that you need to, what it is you broke, what it is you need to do to pay back whatever debt you owe. And this thing is, of course, held against us. And then he says, which was contrary to us. So well, didn't he just say it was against us, and now he's saying it's contrary to us? Well, yeah. This word for contrary is more like what we think of, at least in our modern English, as against. So in other words, not only was this bill being held against us, the bill itself was against us. It was contrary to us. It was opposed to us. It's as though it was alive in some way. It was anti-you and wanted to stop you, wanted to block you. And he says this thing that was contrary to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. It's like, wow. Oh, did I skip a verse? Having wiped out the hand that was against us, and I guess not. Okay, cool. See, I go on fast forward sometimes, and it's not fun. Having wiped out. This word for wiped out is kind of fun. It means just to smear out, to blot out, to expunge, to wipe something off. You know, again, it was all handwritten. They didn't obviously have printers or computers, so everything was done written out by hand. So in order to make something go away, you had to erase it. We would just say delete. He has deleted them. Ka-chink, gone. Drag it to the trash, empty trash, gone. Wiped out. That's what he's talking about. This handwriting of requirement. It's gone. So think about it like this whole idea that this sort of process of picture painting he's doing. You eat out at a restaurant, and the bill comes to the table. Jesus is with you at the table, and it happens to be his restaurant. So what he does is he reaches over and erases the bill like you were never charged. Yay! Right? That's what he's doing. In fact, that's what justification is. You more theologically minded people, you hear the word justification. It means just as if I'd never done it. We are justified in him. It's erased. It's as though it were never there. And then he goes on to sort of extend this restaurant analogy. He goes further. The bill comes to the table. We get up and try to leave, and the waiter holds the bill up between us and the door. It is now between us. The bill says what we owe, so it's a bill against us, but it's also against us, right? It says that Jesus took it away. He took it out from between us and where it is we want to go. That's what this word means. He has taken it out of the way, taken it from in between, taken it from the middle. What's more is he grabs it before we can even reach it, and he takes it over to a bulletin board on the wall that says Jesus' tab, and he tacks it up there, nails it to the cross. It's on him. This is the picture Paul is painting. Isn't that a great picture? It's not, he says, okay, it's erased. No, it's not just erased. It's taken out of the way. No, it's not. It's been like nailed to the cross. Gone. Do you guys get this? That's what he's saying. Our problem is, however, we go to this restaurant, Jesus does all this stuff, and we go, thanks, Jesus, and we go back in the kitchen and start washing dishes. That's what we do. Thanks, God. Great. Now, where's the brush? Where's the soap? How do you work this, Hobart washing machine? How do you do this thing? What's up? That's exactly what we do. Or think about it this way, setting the restaurant thing aside. How would you feel if someone came to your house and, Oh, this might sound weird, but forget the weirdness of it. They came to your house, and they said, I'd like to see all of your bills for everything you owe. Mortgage, car payment, credit cards, school loans, all of it. Bring it all out. And so you bring it all out. And the guy goes, okay, I'll take those and pay them off completely. How would you feel? Happy. Come on, how would you feel? Right? You'd feel pretty good, right? You'd feel pretty relieved, wouldn't you? Oh, this weight is gone. You'd feel very freed up. Like, I don't owe. You'd be pretty stoked. Those debts we can, in theory, pay off, right? In theory. The debt we owe God, we have no means to pay off on our own. So Jesus did it for us in full. How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel relieved? Does it make you feel free? Have you ever felt those things before? Because that's what the point of all of this is. Now, this may come as a shock, but you don't owe God anything. Wait a minute. Hang on. What about that song? Oh, Jesus paid it all to the I owe. I get that. You don't, while we do, in a sense, owe him everything, you don't owe him anything because it's already paid for. You can't pay back someone to whom you don't owe any money. Right? That's essentially what's happening here. You don't owe him anything any more than if you were to go to the store and buy something, that thing doesn't owe you anything, does it? Sounds ridiculous, but that's really what this is. You go to the store and you buy something. The only thing you expect from it is that it fulfills its purpose for which you bought it, whatever the thing is. But it doesn't owe you anything, right? Because you bought it. You own it. It's your thing. You don't have you buy the TV and say, you owe me. Come on, right? And that's not what we do. Well, Jesus bought us, and he has a purpose for us to fulfill. And he doesn't have a you owe me attitude. And I think we treat God like that a lot. Again, you don't repay someone to whom you're not indebted. Now, having said that, we do need to fulfill the purpose for which we were purchased, which is relationship, which takes on a variety of forms. Sons, daughters, he calls us. He calls us friends. He calls us his bride. He calls us his body. We do need to do those things, but it's not necessarily out of a sense of indebtedness so much as it is a sense of love and relationship and thanksgiving. Do you consciously or not live with the sense that you owe God, that you need to pay him back? Is he Santa God to you? You better watch out, you better not cry, you better not pout. How's that song go? I don't know, I'm just throwing words out there coming to the front of my head. He knows, he sees you when you're sleeping. Creepy. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. So be good for goodness sake. You owe me. Is that God to you? Is that how you live with your spouse? Is that how you live with your friends? Is that your basis of your relationship? Do you still feel dead to Jesus instead of alive with him? If you feel dead to Jesus, if you live with a sense of indebtedness to him instead of relationship with him and love for him, it's not him, it's you in this particular relationship. It's not you, it's me. No, it is you. That's the reality of the situation. So what we need to do, or what I'll just say it to you, let yourself be alive with him. Let yourself off the hook and enjoy the freedom that fulfilling the purpose for which he has bought you, which is relationship. Stop trying to dig the hole full. So with Jesus, we are systemically free. That's the second truth. The last one we're going to look at today is the rest of the chapter. Because of Jesus alone, we are systemically at peace. Paul is going to continue doing some picture painting. Verse 15, having disarmed principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. The picture Paul is painting this, again, it's Roman times. It's Roman society. The Roman armies would go and conquer a people, and what they would do is, the general would be at the head of this parade coming back through the various villages and towns, and in this parade would be his own soldiers, of course, who are the mighty victors, along with the spoils of war showing off to the people in the towns, along with enemy soldiers that they've taken captive and who are now stripped of their weaponry. So it's this very public spectacle, humiliating thing for those involved. And so Paul says, having disarmed the principalities and powers, these supposed angelic ranks that the Gnostics were into, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them, leading them in this parade. Think gladiator. Put that kind of imagery in your mind of leading captive those things that were once your enemies, disarmed, powerless. These angelic spiritual structures and authorities, these principalities and powers that the Gnostics revered, Jesus owns them. That's what he totally pwned them. That's what's going on. Jesus leads them stripped of or disarmed in a very public way. You can go, there they go. No power over me. And that's not an arrogant thing because you didn't do it. He did it, right? Or to be a little more modern, maybe you've seen footage from World War II where, at the end of the victory in Europe, the American Allied forces are leading the German soldiers, hands on their heads, marching down the street, no guns. They're being led in triumph, having been disarmed as a public spectacle. Paul says that's what Jesus did. That's what has happened. In verse 10, Jesus is the head of all these principalities and powers. Well, now he's not just the head. He totally owns them. These things from which he says don't be cheated through philosophy and empty deceit. These things that he says don't let them lead you captive. He is now leading captive. Isn't that cool? I love how Paul connects these dots. It's just so awesome. There is nothing to fear from these things. They have no power over us except the power which we give them. Now, that's not like a positive, feel-goody kind of, you can do it, the power within, from the SpongeBob cartoon, the power within, Karate Island. No, it's not that's not what we're talking about. It's these things don't have any power over us except what we give over to them to rule over us. And we'll come back to that in just a second. Paul says in verse 16, so because of this, because they've been disarmed and led in triumph, let no one judge you in food or in drink or regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths. Let no one judge you. To judge, in this case, this word means to form and hold an opinion, to come to a conclusion. It's not judge in the sense of condemn, as it is, I see what you're doing and this is my opinion of it, and I hope you feel bad because of it. Paul says, let no one judge you in that way. Now, people are going to do what people are going to do. So you have no control over what they are going to do. What you do have control over is what their judgment, how it's going to affect you. You see what I'm saying? So when he says, let no one judge you, it's not like stop them from doing it. It's like, don't let it bug you. Don't let it affect you because those things have been defeated. Don't let them have any power over you. And he says concerning, food and drink, people who are looking down on you because of the things you eat and the things you drink, or because of the festivals, the Jewish feasts that you do or do not participate in. He says, that's missing the point completely. Why? Because, verse 17, these are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ. You see, people made the rules and the observances the main events, forgetting that they all pointed to Jesus. If he uses this picture of a shadow in a body. I mean, if somebody's shadow showed up, would you be talking to the shadow saying, hey, how's it going? That'd be dumb, right? It's here. Yay, all hail the shadow. Well, something's making that shadow, and it's a body, and that's really the main event. Paul says, you guys are, you're talking to shadows. You're worshiping shadows. You're putting shadows above the thing that is casting the shadow. which is Jesus. A modern day example of this kind of thing might be baptism. And I've mentioned this before, having done some traveling. If you've ever been to the South or driven I-40 in Tennessee, there's billboards that say, you need to be baptized to be saved. No, that's putting something that God never said over you. That's focusing on the shadow and not the substance of the thing to come. Now, should you get baptized? Yes, but that is not what saves you. And these guys were saying the same things. You're eating that, you can't be saved. You don't go to this festival, you can't be saved. That's not the point. Putting this religiosity over them, between them and Christ, you could say. So he says, let no one judge you. And then verse 18, let no one cheat you of your reward. And like I said earlier, this is a different word for cheat. When he says, let no one, this is a command. This isn't just a suggestion. This is him saying, don't let this happen. Don't let this bug you. This is imperative. In fact, he says, if it's been bugging you, stop letting it and then continue on in such a way that you aren't being bugged by it. Okay? Let no one cheat you. So earlier, cheat was don't be led astray from. This cheat is maybe more of what we think of. The word has to do with a judge or an umpire at the games, the Olympic Games or a sporting event, making a bad call or a call against you that results in you losing the prize. I can remember one of my dad's favorite phrases when a call was being made against the Seahawks was, "We were robbed." You ever said that during a game? You got robbed, man. That's what this is, cheated. If you feel like you got cheated out of something because there was a bad call made, because somebody else, their opinion, that's what a judge does, that's what an umpire does, is they see the situation and they come to a conclusion about it and they make a judgment. It says, don't let anyone judge you. Don't let anyone, cheat you because of their judgment of a situation of your reward. Don't let it bug you. Don't let it influence you. Don't let it rob you of the peace that you are supposed to have. Well, of what reward? Let's talk about the reward first. Well, the reward is what we've been talking about, the systemic completeness, the systemic freedom that we can have, and now this systemic peace in Jesus alone. So don't let anyone cheat you of those rewards. Don't let the opinions or conclusions of others have any power over you, because again, they only have as much as we give them, because Jesus has already disarmed these principalities and powers, the judgment of others. And that can be difficult. A picture might be maybe you had a parent who expressed opinions about your appearance or something about you, and that can hang on you for a very, very long time. And it can be very hard to shake. And it might be easier if that parent just simply said, hey, you know what, I was wrong, and that's not true anymore. Maybe that never happens, but those expressions only have as much power over you as you let them. So today, when people get hung up on drinking, consuming alcohol, and others can be very legalistic and judgmental about that, don't let their legalism, that might be great for them, hinder your ability to have freedom in that particular thing. Now, again, don't go out and get hammered. That's not what I'm saying. But don't let their legalism hinder your peace and your freedom that you can have in Jesus. I'm not preaching the power of positive thinking. Rather, I'm preaching the reality of in Jesus living. That's the difference. The power of in Jesus living. Peace is what I'm talking about. Peace as opposed to what? Because I don't see the word peace in here. That's because it's not in there. I've kind of put it in there, but you're seeing conflict, aren't you? Paul says, let no one judge. That's an internal conflict. Let no one cheat you. Again, that's an internal conflict that robs you of peace. The conflict that the opinions and conclusions of others concerning what it means to be spiritually on track can be introduced in our lives, that can cause conflict, which consequently takes away our peace. And that's not cool. Expectations you may have. I'm a pastor and I'm part of a church and I want to see the church grow and the people in it grow, and which means multiplication and more numbers, and there are, other ministries and schools of thought that say if your church isn't growing, then you're doing something wrong or something's wrong with the people. And that's this baggage that comes in that hinders peace. That's the judgment of others that comes in that robs, me or you or whatever your particular world is of that peace. These other expectations that maybe have good intentions, they rob you, they cheat you of the peace that we're supposed to have that comes from Him alone. Not adding to, not taking away, but Him alone. And Paul gives some examples. Verse 18 again. Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility. False humility has to do with, the well-educated word is asceticism. It means, denying your flesh, or in some cases even beating your own flesh to sort of, because flesh is bad and you have to punish it, and denying it food or in some way. That's what he's talking about. It's false humility. Humility is fine, but this is false humility. Don't, beat your body up that way, hoping to earn something. And then he says, worshiping of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. They would have this intruding in on, would be like going to a particular place to experience a vision of the heavenly realms. And that's supposed to earn you something. It's like you haven't been there, you haven't seen it. It's all just bogus. Or maybe you did. Maybe you had some hallucination, and maybe you actually saw angelic beings, which were probably demons, and influencing you away from the truth of God's word. It says this person is vainly puffed up. They're inflated. They're a hot air balloon. That's what the word means, to blow on, to inflate something. They're full of air, full of nothing. Instead of, verse 19, they're not holding fast to the head. Who's the head? Jesus is the head. They're not holding on to that. They're holding on to all this other stuff, but they're not holding on to the only important thing. From whom, from the head, all the body, again, there's that word that would hang them up. Flesh is bad. It's not the flesh, this body he's talking about. It's talking about his body of Christ, that spiritual body. From whom all the body, nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows. And the increase that is from God, with the increase that is from God. So it's not even us growing ourselves, as long as we're all connected to the head. It sounds kind of gross, but a lot of churches operate, people operate, believers operate, decapitated. That's not cool. Hold on to that head. Make sure you have your head well attached, because from that and from all the ligaments and joints and all the stuff that's knit together the way it's supposed to be, as long as our bodies are interconnected and interdependent, the growth comes from God. It comes from the head. It comes from Jesus. He is the source of all of this growth. Verse 20, therefore, Paul's going to bring it home. Therefore, if you died with Christ, and that word if doesn't mean maybe you have, maybe you haven't. This if is if you have died with Christ and you have, it expects a positive answer. Therefore, if you died with Christ, which you did, from the basic principles of the world, these things don't hold any power over you, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations, such as do not touch, do not taste, do not handle? He says, why are you guys doing that? You're dead to those things, but you subject yourselves to them. Who is subjected to them? The believer is. Who did the subjecting? The believer. This is why I say, Paul says, don't let the judgment of others hang you up. Don't let them cheat you of these things, because we subject ourselves to them, to some form of legalism, to some form of expectation that will fill a need, like I've been saying the whole time. Don't let that happen. People say, well, the devil made me do it. Bologna sausage. The devil can't make you do anything. He might plant the seed, but you do it. I trespassed. Well, you still trespassed. You're responsible for it. Do not taste, do not touch, do not handle. You subject yourselves to these things. And again, it might be well-intentioned, but it still leads you down the wrong path. Which, verse 22, which all concern things, the touch, taste, and handle, which perish with the using. like, let's say there's some legalistic person that says, don't eat apples. Well, God made the apple, right, to be eaten, and what happens after you eat it? It perishes, right, with the using of it. Paul's saying, it turns into poop, you guys, come on. What's the big? Let it go. And then finally, verse 23, these things indeed have an appearance of wisdom. Because sometimes, be honest, somebody has some formula, some process, and if you're in a state of feeling incomplete and not free and not at peace, you want something to fill that up. And if something looks good, you might go after it. Paul says these things indeed have an appearance of wisdom in self-imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body, but are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. Are we supposed to deal with the indulgence of the flesh? Absolutely, we are. That was the Galatians 5:16-18. It's the flesh versus the spirit. We are supposed to deal with that. Well, how do we deal with it? Do we do it by adding rules and regulations and other expectations? No. We do it by dying to it in Jesus. That's Galatians 5:24 and 25. Put that up. Por favor. Paul says, and those who are Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Are you hung up in legalism that you have imposed on yourself or allowed others to impose on you? Have you allowed your sense of peace to be cheated from you by the bogus expectations you have set up yourself or others have set up for you? If you have lost your sense of peace, or if you have never had it, it's because you have let others, who may be well-intentioned, cheat you away from it. Remember that you have died with Jesus, and that the things that cheat you of your peace have no power over you. They've been marched off in humility. They have no power over those who have been made alive in him, except that which you give them. Stop trying to dig the hole full. Because of Jesus alone, we are systemically at peace. See, the Colossian believers were experiencing a lack of understanding in these things, which led to or resulted in a lack of peace concerning how and why we as believers are to battle the indulgence of the flesh. This was causing people to seek out false wisdom and legalism. However, systemic Christianity means that disciples of Jesus, like you and I, should experience a continual sense of completeness and freedom and peace by means of Jesus alone. We need to be on guard against empty ideas, those hollow chocolate bunnies, that can lead us away from and cheat us out of these rewards by adding to or taking away from what Jesus has already done. And that's what it is. You're adding to Jesus, you're taking away from Jesus, trying to have Jesus. That doesn't work. So, as I said before, don't let anyone, especially yourself, rob you of the completeness that you have in him. Let yourself be alive in him. Let yourself off the hook. It sounds new agey and Philadelphia, no. But forgive yourself. Jesus has. Let it go. And enjoy the freedom of fulfilling the purpose for which he bought you, which is relationship. Thirdly, remember that you have died with Jesus and that the things that cheat you of your peace have no power over you or over those, who have been made alive in him except that which you give them. In other words, the point of the whole morning is stop trying to dig the hole full.